Hey, hi guys, can you all hear me? If you all can, then yeah, you can just nod your head or like shake your head. So, sorry for the delay. I'm currently waiting for more people to join, but I don't think they'll be joining anytime soon. So you can continue texting your friends if they haven't joined, like they're late from lunch or whatever. And I'll start my lecture first. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Costa Officer Grade 5 Xing Hui, and I'll giving a lecture on program planning and execution. So it is important to be clear on the module objectives because you'll be tested and graded on your knowledge on them. Firstly, you should be able to understand the importance of proper planning and execution, describe the components of planning for an event, be able to draft a simplified risk and hazard assessment, be able to draft an event proposal and apply the knowledge and skills learned in a core context. If at any point of time I'm speaking too quickly or you need some time to process, then you can just slow me down, like just type it in the chat or just unmute yourself, okay? So moving on to the importance of planning. Program planning is about considering various factors and putting into place different steps to achieve objectives. It helps to increase efficiency and effectiveness, facilitate proper coordination and control, facilitate decision making, aids in organizing, and encourages creativity and innovation. So now I'll be moving on to the components of planning. Sorry, hold on, I'm having a technical issue, so please give me a second. I carry on. Oh, I thought something happened. The components of planning are as such. So before the event, we'll come up with a proposal that consists of the following. So your objective, the committee, work plan, budgeting, venue, risk management, action plans, and writing a proposal. So during the event is quite simple. So it will be the execution, and then there will be an after action review after the event. I'll now elaborate more on each component of proposal planning. So first we'll talk about the objectives. It is important to provide clear directions when planning and to set benchmarks and targets to aim for. Hence, it is important to ensure that they are SMART. What exactly is SMART? So objectives have to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So what do we mean by specific? We can now take a read. I'll be explaining each part in the subsequent slides. Okay, so what do we mean by specific? So you ask yourself if the objective proposed is clear, precise and well-defined, whether is it clear, concise, and easily understood. So a simple example would be as such. Also to mention, this set of slides is quite different from the slides that you are provided with. So if you need to look back on the lecture, it will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube. So you can now take down notes or review the lecture on YouTube later afterwards. So measurable. How will you or your participants know whether the objective is achieved? Using my current lecture as an example, if I only state that I want you guys to understand how to plan an activity, I won't be able to judge whether you actually learn how to plan an activity. So for me to measure whether my objectives have been met, I will expect you to be able to properly describe the components of planning as I mentioned before. Thirdly, achievable. So does the is it within the capabilities of your participants to meet this objective? And will they be able to access the required resources to ensure that this objective can happen? So you can take a read for the example. You can see some of you are taking down notes. Next, relevant. Does the objective align with your current goal, overall goal, or is it random? Can you read the example? Okay, and lastly, is your objective timely? What's the deadline you're setting and is it visible? Looking at the given example, instead of vaguely saying that the participants will learn how to dress a wound, it'd be more accurate and useful to state that they will learn how to dress a wound by the second week of the workshop. So everyone got that? So you can, like what I said before, you can sound off if I'm speaking too quickly. So now moving on to forming a committee. We form a committee because it increases efficiency and manpower is divided into smaller branches with teams in charge of specific tasks. So there's admin, log, safety, ops. These are the common committees that will be formed. However, if the program you're planning for is a simple, small-scale one, such as a practical first aid lesson in your core, you can combine some committees together because there are less details. Oh, I need admin someone. Because there's less details that needs to be taken care of. So for example, in a core, maybe the person in charge of admin work can also oversee the safety of the cadets. So the following slides will be the job scope of each committee. So you can take a read as I flash each slide. You don't need to copy everything word for word because like what I said, everything will be uploaded. Okay, now moving on to logistics, can continue taking a read. So for safety, I'll further elaborate on what risk and hazard assessment is later on. In your operations. So anyone needs more time? Or is it okay for me to carry on? Just not okay. So next I'll be moving on to work plan. A work plan clearly marks out the various deadlines and responsibilities during the planning phase. It is helpful in delegating and detailing out all necessary tasks. Important thing to take note is that this work plan is done during the planning phase and not the execution phase because later on there will be action plan and the previous batch of cadets tend to confuse the both of them. So a good work plan should be able to show the readers various tasks at hand, inform who must carry them out, and by when should the task be completed. So this is an example of a work plan. It's quite straightforward, so you can take a look and read. So there's like different columns to it, right? There's actions, estimated time completion date, and which department is in charge of it. So this gives the committee and whoever's reading it a very clear picture of what you're supposed to do by each timing, like essentially the timeline. Now moving on to budgeting. A budget plan allows you to determine in advance whether you have enough money for your event or program. This is an example of a budget plan. It is very useful in helping you visualize the specific items required for each purpose and whether the same item can be reused for another activity so you can cut costs. So for example, if you know that you need ground sheets for two different activities which will be executed at different timings, you can coordinate and reuse the ground sheets instead of buying or indenting another set. It's worth noting that it will be easier for your planning team or whoever's reading your proposal or slides to be able to reference your budgeting plans to your logistical needs conveniently. Because like what I said, the previous batch, what some of them did was to put a budget plan and a logistic plan separately. So it was quite confusing to go to and fro, but you can just combine them together or put them side by side for easier reference. Moving on to venue. The venue is very straightforward. So factors to consider when selecting a venue include the location's availability and permissions, whether it allows your program to take place, and whether contingency plans can take place. Now let's look at some questions to recap on whatever I went through. So I'll be asking a few questions. You guys can type the answers in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself first to answer them, then you can go ahead. If not, I'll be picking out some people to answer the questions. So first question, what does SMART stand for? Okay.
Us.
Yes? Did someone just say something? Co-host. No. Okay. Okay, I see more or less everyone is giving like same answer, similar answers. Can Atika from CCK unmute your mic? So what?
Hi.
Hi. So what does SMART stand for?
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely.
Okay, yeah, that's very good. That's the correct answer because previously you wrote SMART, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely, which is slightly wrong because as you all can see from the other people's answer, it stands for specific. So okay, thank you, Atika. Thanks. Okay, now next. Is a work plan used for planning or execution phase? I think I've mentioned this question earlier about how there's some confusion between the two. So I've seen Joy from Bukit Panjang Government High taking down some notes very diligently. So can Joy answer whether it's used, whether a work plan is used for planning or execution?
It's used for planning.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the correct answer. Anyone don't understand any of the questions, you all can just type in the chat or just unmute yourself. So I'll move on to the last question. List out 3 components of planning that you have learned so far. Okay, can Jin Yan from Huazhong unmute your mic, please?
Hello.
Hi, so can you list out 3 components of planning that you have learned so far?
Forming a committee, work plan, and budget.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for answering. So any 3 of these? Now I'll be moving on to risk management. So risk management ensures availability of safety personnel, assess risk involving all key stakeholders, and includes contingency plans should certain situations occur. So contingency plans are plan Bs in the event emergency situations occur. A different set of instructions should be ready since emergency situations allow little time for decision making. Wet weather plans are a subset of contingency plans. So in the case where an outdoor activity must cease due to poor weather conditions, an alternative plan can be executed. So for example, sometimes, example, you go out for a run, it's an outdoor activity. So in the case where you plan for a run outdoor, and then there's a rain or like Cat 1 status, so what will you do? You have to come up with a plan to fall back on. Like for example, maybe you can organize a PT session indoors at the foyer or something similar. So that's the purpose of a wet weather plan. Security response plan involves the detailed procedure of how to respond to cases of emergency which would endanger the safety of the people present. So for instance, in the case where a cadet gets into an accident and requires medical coverage, a treatment or evacuation plan should be prepared and executed. So in case someone actually gets injured, and it's so serious that you have to send the person to the hospital, you know how to react to it, who to contact first and such. And you won't have to like panic when it happens. So this slide explains what the risk and hazards assessment is. So you can take a read. So the following are examples of possible risks. I'll now go through how a risk and hazards assessment table is done. So first, you list out the activities and identify possible hazards associated with it. And secondly, you evaluate the risk level. So as you can see, there's numbers under risk evaluation, the severity, likelihood, and risk level. So you might not be sure what these numbers are. I will further explain later on. But what's important for learning at your level, right, is to know how to identify hazards. So for the previous batches, many people were confused between hazard and possible accidents. This is something that later when you break out into your groups for activity, your facilities will further elaborate on it. But essentially, hazard is like a physical, dangerous like item, for example, like slippery floor, sharp edges of your table. And possible accident is the danger that is an accident that might happen to a person. So because of the slippery floor, you might slip and fall, or because of a sharp edge of the table, you might knock onto it and get injured. So that's the difference. After you're done with the hazard identification and risk evaluation, you'll then fill in the remaining details, how the possible risk will be managed and the personnel involved. So that's your risk control and actions. So this is an example of a matrix used to calculate the risk level of a possible hazard identified. You have to rate the likelihood and severity according to the description and calculate the risk level by multiplying both numbers together. You don't have to know these two in depth, and the matrix used for different organizations or like different schools are different. So it really depends on the where you're on which side, like example, what school you are planning for, like what event you're planning for. So you can just like take a read at how, for example, if you know that this hazard is a minor hazard, so it will be 1, right? And then the likelihood of it occurring, if you are certain that it always occurs, then there will be a higher level of chance of it happening, and that's how you get your higher risk ranking. As you can see here, there's low, medium, high, and extremely high. Moving on to action plans. Action plans detail out the specific action that have to be taken by different stakeholders during the execution phase, and it ensures that members are all clear of their responsibilities. This is an example of an action plan. It should be as detailed and as clear as possible, and so whoever receives it should immediately understand what they have to do at each timing. So that's why I say during the execution phase, when you look at your action plan, if I'm in charge of a certain segment, but I'm not involved in the planning, if I look at from, for example, 0800 to 0815, I immediately know that the activity is first parade. And I have to, as a platoon IC, for instance, I have to take attendance, or rather as an NCO, I have to collect valuables. So the last component of planning before an event will be writing a proposal. A proposal is used to propose and seek approval for an activity. It helps to justify and outline the information of a program. So you can take a read about the things you should include in the proposal. Most of the things to include in your proposal were the components of planning that I have previously introduced to you. So these are the more detailed things that you have to include in your proposal, such as the title, date, time, and venue. So for aims and objectives, you have to align it with the SMART goals that you have learned before. Now I'll be talking about the execution of a program. So during execution, a pre-activity brief is necessary to ensure the flow of activities is according to plan and that stakeholders are aware of what they need to do. So this brings us back to the action plans. If your action plan is detailed and clear enough, it will sufficiently aid your execution phase, as everyone will understand what they have to do for each activity without confusion. Lastly, I'll be talking about the reviewing of a program. So after action review, or what we commonly say AAR, is a meeting conducted to look back at the entire process of planning and execution. It allows us to identify what went well and what can be improved on in future. It allows each department to share their views and concerns about the entire program. So a review is important because it provides us with a learning process and acts as an archive for future planning teams to reference for. So for example, if you were to start planning immediately now, it might be quite confusing for you. So if you have to plan for an NCOC camp, for example, your previous batch of NCOs will probably have their proposals done up and they will most likely already have an after action review. So you can seek for their help. Like example, what are the things to look out for, maybe especially for your school's context. So the following questions can be considered prior to an after action review to facilitate discussion. What went wrong and why did it go wrong? How can this be prevented in the future? What went right and why did it go right? And how can this be continued in the future? So this is not, the after action review is not just about picking out mistakes for your future batches to learn from, but it can also talk about what went right, what was good about this program, so that future batches can also learn from it. You can continue this good practice of your proposal or your program. Okay, so now we'll practice doing a proposal. You'll be split into your respective breakout rooms to plan a proposal for the following scenario. So there's an upcoming NAPFA test in a month. You and your fellow NCOs are to plan for a PT session. You'll be given 20 minutes to cover all components of planning, and a link to the Google Docs template will be sent to your respective room. Each room will present the proposal to the fellow facilitators, and once we all gather back, we'll do a final review on the common mistakes made in proposal planning. So there will be a template that you can follow, and your fellow facils in your breakout room will send you the link. So now just give us a moment. We'll split you out into your respective breakout rooms.
Hey, hi guys, so can you hear me? While Sinhui is continuing to bring us into the breakout rooms, just start to think about this scenario first, because afterwards in the 20 minutes it includes presentation time to our facilitators. So actually the actual planning time isn't a lot. So think about what activities you want to do, and then think about the respective components that she was covering, about perhaps like safety stuff, what are some risks that you might expect, about maybe where weather plan, what uh in case of Cat 1, in case of lightning, then where will you hold this entire event. So another thing is, some of you guys have learned in BNCC about MOI and like lesson plans. So this PT sounds like something that will happen in a lesson plan, right? So it might be a bit confusing, but basically just think of this as like a day program. It's an entire event that's quite complex because let's say for this PT, it's not just gonna be everyone running together. Maybe some will be training for their standing broad jump, some will be training for push-ups or pull-ups, some will be training for see and reach. So there's a lot of things going on at the same time, and that's why with the complexity of events, this is considered more of a program rather than like a lesson. Yeah, so just uh, start to get your engines running about how you want to plan this entire PT day program, and
Okay, so 2 minutes is up. I won't wait any further. I assume that most people are back from your break. Okay, so I'll carry on. So now, after the activity, right? I'm pretty sure your facials have gone through with you what was like good and what was like what can be improved on for your proposal. So I would like a representative from each group to briefly share with me what were the positive feedbacks as well as area of improvement for your proposal. So anyone from group one would like to unmute yourself and just talk. If not, I'm just gonna randomly point someone out. Okay, can Yufei from Bukit Panjang Government High unmute yourself? Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what was good about, like what were the good pointers shared by your facils about your proposal?
I think generally everybody contributed at least a bit of information, and we were actively discussing. We eventually got to discussing the different parts of the document.
Anything about the details or like the content of the proposal? Like for example, do you think like your objectives were smart? Like in what ways were they smart? Or like maybe you can talk about your action plan, RAMs, etc.
Uh, I think generally they were quite specific on like deadlines and the tasks we had to do.
So your work plan was specific.
Yeah. Yes.
Anything else?
And in the risk and hazard assessment, we were able to list very specific conditions that you had to look out for.
And what about area of improvement? Were there anything that you think you could have done your group could have done better? Like improve on if you were given more time, for example?
I think we could have improved our efficiency when discussing all the information, because there's some incomplete points here.
Incomplete points. Anything about the content? Like for example, do you think like your goals were smart enough? Like were there like specific goals you think, or maybe it could have been clearer?
I think it could have been more specific or like more measurable, like how.
More measurable.
Yeah.
So what do you think was not measurable about your goals? Like
We didn't really have like a checkpoint to show that we achieved our objectives.
point, okay. So maybe I will talk about this more later on after the other groups share about the pointers. So thank you for sharing with me, Faye. So now may I have someone from room 2 to share with me? Anyone want to volunteer themselves? To so maybe Yixuan from Nanyang Girls High. Yep, can you unmute yourself and share with me? You're muted, you're muted.
I think our areas for risk and hazard assessment was good.
What do you mean by risk and assessment was good?
Like as in the hazard.
Oh, hazards listed.
Yeah. And
Yep.
the remarks for the action plan.
What about it?
I think it's like taking care of the students when they are having these activities.
So taking into account the welfare, the well-being of your
the
cadets.
students. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Okay, what about area of improvement? Do you first share with you what could have been improved on, or you personally feel like maybe something about your proposal can be improved on? Like if I were to give you more time, what will you think? What do you think you will work on?
I think the logistics part.
Logistics?
We could put the item even though there's no cost or anything.
So do you mean that, or you just y'all just listed, y'all didn't list out the logistics because there wasn't a need to buy it? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I understand.
And then for the risk and hazard assessment part, like for the possible accident, we can like for like the hazard, we can actually split up the different types of hazard into different like parts.
Anything else you want to add on?
Also can take note of our objectives to make it like follow the SMART instead of like being too vague or general.
So why do you think your group didn't include the SMART goals, or why were you all vague about the objectives?
Like at first, but then for the recent one, I think we edited.
Okay, so it was initially vague, but then you all further improved on it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your sharing. So now we'll move on to group 3. Anyone from group 3 want to share? If not, maybe Chloe from Crunchy Sec can unmute your mic and like share with me. Hi. Can you just give me a few brief ones? If you really cannot remember, then it's fine.
The
Try to remember what your
objectives were good.
Sorry?
The objectives were good.
Objectives were good. In what way were they good? You can take a look at your proposal and like kind of see what was good or bad about your proposal. Or does anyone else from room 3 want to help Chloe out? Maybe Brian from Hwa Chong room 3 can help her out also. Brian from Hwa Chong will like, yeah, thank you. Is there anything you want to share about your proposal?
I think we could have included a wet weather plan for the 2.4 run.
So there wasn't any wet weather plan for 2.4 run.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Anything good about your proposal?
Uh,
Maybe about your objectives. Anything good about your objectives?
I don't know.
I'm not too sure. Okay, it's okay. We are currently kind of running short of time, so I'll skip on the other groups first. So just now I have briefly looked through the proposals done by each group. So I will now briefly show you what each group has done. So y'all will have access to the proposals of other groups, so y'all can learn from like one another's. So firstly, I'll start off with the SMART goals, okay? So for group 3, maybe you can take a read first. So I think what was good about the proposal was that most of the SMART goals were met, right? As you can tell, they were very specific that they want, example, they want the participants to cut their 2.4 timing by at least 30 seconds and 1 second for shuttle run. So the goals are very measurable. And they also state, so it's generally very, very specific, very measurable. But one thing that maybe you guys can improve on, because is for it to be more attainable. So example, you see, is it really realistic for the participants to immediately improve their 2.4 timing by 30 seconds within one PT session? Yes or no, you can just like nod or like shake your head, you know. So if you really think it's realistic, then you can go ahead with it. But then in my opinion, I don't really think it's that realistic for a cadet to suddenly improve their 2.4 timing by 30 seconds after one PT session. So this is something you can take into consideration. But it's good that you guys were very specific in the outcome that you wish to see. So for example, group 2, they also have very specific goals, but it wasn't really measurable, unlike group 3. So y'all can like learn from one another's mistakes. Okay, now I'll be moving on to the committee. So for group 1, I think it's good that you guys included specifically which member of your planning team to be in which committee. Previously I saw one group typing the job scope of each member. So I think that was good. I can't really see which group it's from, but I think it was deleted. But it's something you can include if you want to. So everyone has a clear understanding of the roles and responsibility of each committee member. So now I'll briefly move on to the action plan. So I will continue with maybe group 1 first. So I think group 1's action plan, you have very realistic timings given. For example, attendance taking, splitting groups up 10-15 minutes. I think these are very good and realistic timings. Everything is pretty clear also. So now I'll jump over to group 5. The action plan for group 5, I like how specific it is and the remarks are really very clear. And there's like water breaks and stuff indicated. But one thing that I think maybe can be improved on is how realistic the timings are. So for example, you want to have sit and reach and maybe your sit-ups to be conducted in 10 minutes. And under remarks, you state that you want water breaks to be conducted for the last 5 minutes. So that gives you about 5 minutes to conduct each activity. So maybe you can think back about whether it actually is realistic. And looking at the number of cadets you have in each group. So maybe the timings can be increased to make it more realistic. And you might want to include some buffer times. So when you execute your program, for example, in case the program's delay, at least you still have a buffer time to fall back on.
Martin, were you saying something?
No.
Oh, okay, I saw you unmuted. Then why?
If anyone have anything you want to say about your proposal, like maybe you wanted to add on something but you didn't have the time to, you can just unmute yourself and tell me, or tell the rest of your fellow cadets, okay. Okay, so now that I'm at group 5, maybe I'll just quickly scroll over to the RAMs portion. So I think it's very nice how they specifically included all the hazards they think is probable, and also like the possible accident or ill health. The risk control measures are also pretty good, but one thing that didn't quite match up was how, for example, this portion talk about how there's a lack of stretches before strenuous activity, and one risk control measures is to conduct stretches before start of all activity. But then if I were to scroll back to your action plan, it wasn't really included in your action plan, because for action plan, actually you should also include the preparation work beforehand, and also like, for example, warm up, and not just really like jump into the activity itself. So this is something y'all can take note of, because if your risk control measure were to state, oh, you want them to have a proper warm up, maybe you can like put a 10 to 15 minutes of warm up session for your cadets. So this is just an example of how an action plan should be done. And it should also include the preparation work to be done. So for example, for Group 5's action plan, you talk about how you borrow the seat and reach equipment from PE department before CCA starts. So this portion, as you say, is before CCA starts. So maybe you can just add into the timeline, and then you say who will be in charge of borrowing all these, because you also need time to set the equipments up, right? Yeah, so these are pointers to take note of. So now, for contingency plans, I see many groups have talked about how you want to conduct your NAFA PT session in the indoor sports hall, which is pretty good because you are concerned about wet weather, right? So for example, for Group 1, you have your running track and you have your indoor sports hall, which I think is very realistic, because most schools actually don't have an indoor sports hall, and the most they have is probably like a school hall. And even if they have an indoor sports hall, they probably don't have the entire full-size running track. So it's not really, I don't think it's very realistic or very efficient if you want to have 2.4 training inside an indoor sports hall. So I understand that some of you included indoor sports hall, but maybe running the full 2.4 route isn't the only way to train for 2.4. Maybe you can do some high intensity interval training, or maybe some cardio workout in place of the 2.4 running. And this can be conducted in an indoor sports hall, or maybe just your school hall. So this is something y'all can take into consideration. You don't have to solely stick to this way of planning. Maybe you can use an alternative way, which allows you to meet your objectives the same way. So lastly, I'll talk about logistics and budgeting. So for Group 4, let me just scroll to the bottom. I think they provided a very good and clear table on what kind of logistics they need and where would they borrow it from. And they also stated even if they didn't need to purchase any items. That is very good, it's very clear. So I'm roughly done with sharing my feedbacks with you guys. One thing to take note is, because after this you'll have your presentation, you'll do your presentation lecture, right? So it will carry on from this activity. So maybe you can just still like leave your Google Docs on, so later when you do your slides or preparation for your presentation, then you still have it. So now I'll just do my closing. So now to conclude, the key to planning is taking consistent action. A good planning committee is one that is able to orchestrate an event while taking into account all the different factors and aspects presented. So to summarize, these are the key learning points. So you can take a minute to read through and consolidate your learning. You don't have to copy it down once again. So you can just look at it on the lecture, or maybe you can take a screenshot if you really want to keep it. So does anyone have any questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself or just like type in the chat. If you have question, if you don't have any question, maybe you like can shake your head, so like I don't know. No, right? Okay, so I see many people shaking their head. Okay. So now we'll move on to a quiz, or like rather a survey. You can follow the link below and let me know if there's any issues.